Officer Marcus Webb, had been with the Fairfax County Police Department for 7 years when he drove down a quiet residential street and made a decision that would end his career and cost the county $850,000. He was 29 years old, young enough to think his instincts were sharp, but apparently convinced that his assumptions about who belonged in expensive neighborhoods were more reliable than the evidence in front of him. One Saturday afternoon in Northern Virginia, he received a call about a suspicious person, possibly stealing a luxury vehicle from a driveway in an affluent subdivision. The suspicious person was Special Agent Marcus Thompson, a 12-year ATF veteran, washing his Mercedes in the driveway of the home he'd owned for 6 years. What Webb did next, ignoring property ownership, dismissing reasonable explanations, and escalating a non-crime into a detention, would become proof of how assumptions about who belongs where destroy careers and cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Oakmont Ridge is one of those Northern Virginia subdivisions where the lawns are perfectly manicured, the houses cost upward of $800,000, and the HOA sends letters if your trash cans are visible from the street past 7 p.m. It sits in western Fairfax County, about 20 miles from Washington, D.C. Nestled between older, established neighborhoods and newer McMansion developments. Wide streets lined with Bradford pear trees. Brick colonials with 2-car garages. Driveways long enough for 3 vehicles. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave but don't necessarily know each other's names. Where people work in government, tech, defense contracting. Where a Mercedes or BMW in the driveway doesn't turn heads because half the driveways have them. It was 2:45 p.m. on a Saturday in late April. The temperature had hit 72 degrees, perfect spring weather after a cold March. People were outside, kids on bikes, someone 2 streets over running a lawnmower. The smell of fresh-cut grass and charcoal grills starting up for early dinner prep. Oakmont Ridge, on a Saturday afternoon, was suburbia at its most ordinary. Special Agent Marcus Thompson had been with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives for 12 years. 12 years working cases that required precision, discretion, and an understanding of firearms regulations that most police officers never encountered. He'd started in field operations, conducting compliance inspections of federal firearms licensees, making sure gun dealers were following the rules, tracking serial numbers, verifying background checks. 5 years in Chicago doing undercover work infiltrating illegal gun trafficking rings, the kind of operations where one mistake meant blown covers and dead informants. 3 years in the D.C. field office working interstate firearms trafficking cases, tracking weapons from Virginia gun shows to crime scenes in Baltimore and New York. 2 years on the National Response Team investigating major arson cases and bombings. He'd testified before federal grand juries. He'd coordinated with the FBI, DEA, and U.S. Marshals on joint task forces. He'd received commendations from the Attorney General's office for work on cases that dismantled organizations moving hundreds of illegal firearms across state lines. Before the ATF, Thompson had served 6 years in the Marine Corps, 3 tours overseas, ending as a staff sergeant. The Marines taught him discipline, attention to detail, and how to stay calm when situations got dangerous. The ATF taught him how to build cases that held up in federal court. At 38 years old, Marcus Thompson was exactly where he'd worked to be, raising his 9-year-old daughter in a good school district. That Saturday afternoon, Thompson was off duty. His daughter was at a friend's birthday party. His wife was at a work conference in Atlanta. He had the house to himself and a to-do list that included washing his car, changing the cabin air filter, and maybe grilling some chicken later. Simple weekend tasks. The kind of normalcy he appreciated after weeks spent building cases that required constant vigilance. Thompson's Mercedes S-Class, a 2019 model he'd bought, certified pre-owned 2 years ago, sat in the driveway. Black paint, chrome trim, tinted windows. It was a nice car, but not extravagant by Oakmont Ridge standards. Half the neighborhood drove similar vehicles. Thompson had pulled the car into the driveway around 2:30 p.m., grabbed his bucket, soap, sponge, and hose, and started washing. He was dressed in old Marine Corps PT shorts, a faded gray t-shirt, and sneakers. His ATF credentials were inside the house on his dresser. His service weapon was locked in the safe where he always kept it when off duty. He looked like what he was, a man in his late 30s washing his car on a Saturday afternoon. He'd been washing for maybe 15 minutes, working on the wheels, rinsing soap off the hood when a Fairfax County police cruiser rolled slowly down the street and stopped in front of his house. Officer Marcus Webb, yes, they shared a first name, which would become one of several bitter ironies, was 29 years old and had been with the Fairfax County Police Department for 7 years. In those 7 years, he'd compiled a record that should have raised questions. 9 formal complaints. 9. 7 of them involved allegations that Webb had stopped, questioned, or detained people of color in situations where white residents doing the same things were ignored. 2 complaints had been sustained, resulting in written reprimands and mandatory bias training that Webb attended but clearly didn't internalize. The other 7 had been closed with insufficient evidence or not sustained findings. Webb assumed black and brown people in affluent areas were criminals. The pattern was documented, a black family moving into a home on their moving day. Webb stopped them, demanded proof they weren't burglarizing the house, and only backed off when the real estate agent arrived. A Hispanic man jogging through a neighborhood. Webb detained him for 30 minutes, asking where he lived, where he worked, why he was in that area. An Asian teenager walking home from school through a subdivision. Webb questioned whether he lived there, searched his backpack, and only released him when the kid's mother arrived, furious. Every complaint told the same story. Webb saw people of color in spaces he thought were too expensive, too white, too exclusive for them, and he assumed they were criminals. He never stopped white residents doing the same activities. He never questioned white joggers. He never demanded proof that white people moving into houses actually owned them. His bias was targeted, consistent, and thoroughly documented. But somehow, Marcus Webb remained on patrol. When Webb got the call that Saturday afternoon, his response was immediate and predictable. The dispatcher relayed information from a concerned neighbor. Someone was in a driveway on Oakmont Ridge, possibly stealing a luxury vehicle. The caller had seen a black man messing with an expensive Mercedes and thought it looked suspicious. The dispatcher asked standard questions. Was the person breaking into the car? Was there any actual evidence of theft? The caller hesitated. Well, no, but he's washing it, and I've never seen him before. It just doesn't look right. The call was logged. Webb responded, and from the moment he pulled up, his mind was already made. This black man was stealing this car. This is where assumptions become accusations. This is where years of documented bias override basic observation skills. Because if Marcus Webb had approached the situation with even minimal objectivity, he would have noticed several obvious facts. The man was washing a car that was already parked in a driveway, using cleaning supplies, on private property, in broad daylight, doing nothing that remotely resembled theft. But Webb saw a black man in an expensive neighborhood with an expensive car, and his brain filled in the rest. Crime. Webb stepped out of the cruiser and walked toward the driveway. Step away from the vehicle. Thompson looked up from the wheel he was scrubbing, confused. Excuse me? I said step away from the vehicle. We got a call about someone stealing this car. Thompson stood up slowly, the sponge still in his hand. He was processing what was happening. A police officer was accusing him of stealing his own car from his own driveway. I'm not stealing anything. This is my car. I'm washing it in my driveway. Webb's hand moved to his belt, resting near his weapon. A posture of authority and threat. You have proof this is your house? Thompson gestured at the house behind him. I've lived here for 6 years. My name's on the deed. The mortgage is in my name. The car registration is in my name. Everything here is mine. Then you won't mind showing me some ID and registration. And here's where Marcus Thompson, trained federal agent, faced a decision. Comply and validate an unlawful stop based on nothing more than his race, or assert his rights on his own property. Actually, I do mind. I'm on my own property doing nothing illegal. You have no probable cause to demand my ID. Webb's jaw tightened. This wasn't how stops were supposed to go. People were supposed to comply. ID. Now. Or we can do this the hard way. Thompson kept his voice calm, professional. The tone he used when testifying in court. I'm a federal agent, ATF. My credentials are inside the house. If you want to verify that, I'll go get them. Sure you are. And I'm the Easter Bunny. Hands where I can see them. Webb stepped closer. Thompson didn't move. I'm telling you the truth. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I work out of the D.C. field office. If you'll let me go inside, I'll show you my credentials. You're not going anywhere until I verify who you are and whether you're supposed to be here. By now, neighbors had started to notice. Mrs. Chen, from 2 houses down, pulling weeds in her garden, stood up to watch. A teenager across the street, shooting hoops in his driveway, stopped mid-shot. Someone in a car slowing down to turn into their driveway instead pulled over to see what was happening. Do you think officers should face consequences for detaining people on their own property without probable cause? Drop your answer below. Webb called for backup. Within 5 minutes, another cruiser arrived. Officer Jennifer Caldwell, a 6-year veteran who'd worked with Webb before and knew his patterns. She approached the scene, saw Thompson standing in the driveway with his hands visible, saw Webb positioned like he was managing a criminal stop, and immediately felt something was wrong. What's the situation? Webb gestured at Thompson. Got a call about a possible auto theft. This individual claims he owns the vehicle and lives here, but he's refusing to show ID. Thompson turned to Caldwell, his voice still controlled, but with an edge of frustration. I'm Special Agent Marcus Thompson with the ATF. I've told Officer Webb multiple times that my credentials are inside the house. I'm standing in my own driveway, washing my own car, and I'm being detained for no legal reason. Caldwell looked at the scene. The bucket of soapy water, the sponge on the ground, the hose running, the car clearly mid-wash. She looked at Thompson, middle-aged, dressed casually, no signs of criminal activity. She looked at Webb, and she saw what she'd seen before. Webb, making assumptions. Sir, if you say you're ATF, why don't we just verify that? Thompson nodded. They're inside. On my dresser in the bedroom. If you want to accompany me, I'll go get them. Webb cut in. He's not going inside until we confirm his identity. He could be grabbing a weapon. Caldwell shot Webb a look. He's been cooperative this entire time. Let's just verify and move on. Thompson, with Caldwell watching, walked into his house through the garage door. He returned 90 seconds later, holding a black leather credential case. He opened it, displaying his badge and federal ID card. The badge. Bronze ATF shield. Serial number clearly visible. The ID. His photo. His name, Special Agent Marcus Thompson. His title, the ATF seal. Laminated and official. Webb took the credentials and examined them with suspicion. These could be fake. Thompson's patience was thinning. They're not fake. Call my office. The number's on the card. Call ATF headquarters. Verify my badge number. Caldwell took the credentials from Webb and examined them herself. Everything about them looked legitimate. The weight of the badge, the quality of the ID, the holographic seal. She pulled out her phone and called the ATF's Washington field office. The receptionist transferred her to the duty agent. This is Officer Jennifer Caldwell with Fairfax County Police. I'm calling to verify credentials for a Special Agent Marcus Thompson. Badge number. She read off the number. The duty agent put her on hold for 30 seconds, verified the information in the system, and came back on the line. Special Agent Marcus Thompson is active duty, assigned to our D.C. field office, 12 years of service. Is there a problem, officer? Caldwell's voice was tight. No problem. She hung up and turned to Webb, her voice dropping to something cold. Webb. He's ATF. Webb's face flushed. He looked at Thompson, at the credentials, at the house. at the car. For the first time, the reality of what he'd done started to sink in. Thompson took his credentials back. "Am I free to go? On my own property?" Caldwell nodded. "Yes, sir. We apologize for the confusion." Thompson's voice was ice. This wasn't confusion. This was racial profiling. "I'm a federal agent standing in my own driveway, and I was treated like a criminal because someone called and said a black man was washing a car." A sergeant arrived 10 minutes later, William Kowalski, a 23-year veteran who'd been called to the scene when Caldwell radioed in that they detained a federal agent. Kowalski pulled up, saw Thompson still standing in his driveway, saw the bucket and hose, saw the credentials in Thompson's hand, and immediately understood the magnitude of the problem. "Agent Thompson?" Thompson nodded. Kowalski extended his hand. "Sergeant Bill Kowalski. On behalf of the Fairfax County Police Department, I want to apologize. This stop should never have happened." Thompson didn't shake his hand. "Your officer accused me of stealing my own car, demanded ID on my own property with no probable cause, and suggested my federal credentials were fake. An apology doesn't fix that." Kowalski turned to Webb. "Return to the station." Webb started to protest, but Kowalski cut him off. "Now, Officer Webb." Webb left. Caldwell stayed, taking notes for the incident report she knew would be required. Thompson provided a detailed statement, and several neighbors who'd witnessed the interaction confirmed his account. Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who'd been gardening, was particularly clear. "I saw the whole thing. Agent Thompson was just washing his car. The officer approached like he was dealing with a criminal. It was completely unnecessary. Should officers be required to verify property ownership before detaining residents on their own property? Let me know what you think." The incident report was filed by the end of the day. Within 48 hours, the story had spread through law enforcement circles. An ATF agent detained in his own driveway. By Monday morning, Thompson's supervisors at the ATF had been briefed. By Tuesday, Fairfax County's Internal Affairs Division had opened an investigation. By Wednesday, local news outlets had picked up the story. Federal agent detained while washing car at his own home. The optics were devastating. Thompson wasn't just any citizen wrongly detained. He was a federal law enforcement officer with 12 years of distinguished service, decorated for undercover work, trusted with complex firearms trafficking investigations. And he'd been treated like a car thief because a neighbor saw a black man with a nice car and assumed crime. The ATF issued a statement supporting Thompson and requesting a full investigation by Fairfax County. The FBI's Washington field office, where Thompson had worked joint operations, sent a letter to the Fairfax County police chief expressing concern about the incident. The National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives called for disciplinary action, but the real pressure came from the video. Mrs. Chen, it turned out, had pulled out her phone when she saw the confrontation escalating and recorded the final 5 minutes Webb demanding ID, Thompson explaining he was ATF, Webb calling the credentials potentially fake, Caldwell making the verification call. The video showed everything. Thompson calm and professional, Webb aggressive and dismissive. The video went viral. Thousands of shares. Comments pouring in from other law enforcement officers, some defending Webb, most condemning him. Comments from civilians outraged that even a federal badge wasn't enough to protect a black man from being profiled. Civil rights attorneys contacted Thompson within days. This wasn't just a wrongful detention. This was a Fourth Amendment violation, unreasonable seizure on private property without probable cause. This was racial profiling targeting based solely on race, in a situation where white residents would never have been questioned. This was a civil rights case with a plaintiff who was sympathetic, credible, and utterly unimpeachable. The lawsuit named Officer Marcus Webb, Officer Jennifer Caldwell for failing to intervene sooner, Sergeant William Kowalski for supervisory failure, and Fairfax County. The claims were extensive: unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion or probable cause, Fourth Amendment violation for seizure on private property, violation of federal civil rights under 42 U.S.C., Section 1, 1983, racial profiling and discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and failure to train and supervise officers with documented patterns of discriminatory policing. Fairfax County's attorneys reviewed the evidence and reached the same conclusion the Seattle attorneys had reached in the FBI coffee shop case. Indefensible. The video was clear. The witness statements were unanimous. Thompson's credentials were impeccable. Webb's complaint history showed 9 prior incidents with a clear racial pattern. The county couldn't risk a trial where a decorated federal agent testified about being detained while washing his car. The county settled within 13 months, paying $850,000 to Special Agent Marcus Thompson. No admission of wrongdoing in the settlement agreement, but the payment spoke volumes. Officer Marcus Webb was terminated 11 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was final and unambiguous. Officer Webb detained a federal agent on private property without reasonable suspicion or probable cause, ignored clear evidence of lawful activity, questioned the legitimacy of federal credentials, and demonstrated a pattern of racial profiling documented in 9 prior complaints. Despite multiple training interventions, Officer Webb continued to engage in discriminatory policing practices. His employment is terminated effective immediately. Webb's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career was over at 29 years old. He issued no public statement. Officer Jennifer Caldwell received a written reprimand for failing to intervene earlier in the stop. Sergeant Kowalski was reassigned from field supervision to administrative duties pending additional review. The Fairfax County Police Department faced intense scrutiny. Internal Affairs conducted a comprehensive audit of Webb's 9 prior complaints. The findings were damning. 9 complaints over 7 years, 2 sustained, 7 closed without adequate investigation. Multiple witnesses in prior complaints had their statements minimized or dismissed. Training requirements were completed, but never assessed for effectiveness. Supervisors who noted concerns about Webb's judgment, but took no meaningful action. A system that protected officers over community members. Reforms were announced. Immediate reassignment to non-patrol duties for any officer with 5 or more sustained complaints related to discrimination or bias. Mandatory supervisor review of all traffic stops and detentions with documented justification for each contact. Body camera footage review for all complaints. Real-time flagging of officers with patterns of stops concentrated in minority communities. Independent civilian oversight board with authority to review use of force incidents and discriminatory policing complaints, quarterly training on implicit bias and de-escalation, and annual community forums where residents could voice concerns directly to command staff. Do you think law enforcement agencies should face federal oversight after patterns of racial profiling are documented? Comment below. Special Agent Marcus Thompson testified at a Fairfax County Board of Supervisors meeting 6 months after the settlement. His testimony was measured but powerful. I'm a federal agent with 12 years of experience investigating illegal firearms trafficking. I've worked undercover in some of the most dangerous situations in this country. I've testified before grand juries. I've coordinated with every major federal law enforcement agency. I served 6 years in the Marine Corps, and I was detained in my own driveway because I'm a black man washing a nice car. He paused. I had my house. I had my car. I had my federal credentials. None of it mattered because Officer Webb saw my skin color and decided I was a criminal. I wasn't loitering. I was at my home. I wasn't trespassing. I was on my property. I wasn't stealing. I was cleaning my own vehicle. But to Officer Webb, a black man in an expensive neighborhood with an expensive car could only mean one thing: crime. Another pause. This happens every day to black people who don't have federal badges, to people who don't have law enforcement training, to people whose detentions don't make the news. If this can happen to me with all my experience, all my credentials, all my authority, what happens to everyone else? What happens to the black teenager walking through his own neighborhood? What happens to the black family moving into their new home? What happens to every black person in this county who's doing exactly what they're supposed to do but gets treated like a criminal anyway? The room was completely silent. This wasn't just about one bad officer. This is about a system that let Marcus Webb accumulate 9 complaints over 7 years and kept him on patrol. This is about a culture where neighbors call police because they see a black man and assume crime. This is about a county that paid $850,000 because it couldn't teach its officers to distinguish between actual suspicious activity and existing while black. Should civilians face penalties for racially motivated 911 calls when no crime is occurring? Drop your answer. This wasn't just a wrongful detention. This was proof that for some people, no credential is enough when bias has made its decision. Marcus Thompson showed his federal ATF badge. He identified himself verbally, clearly, calmly. He was on his own property, engaging in lawful activity, violating no law. And none of it mattered because Officer Webb's bias was so complete that it overrode every piece of evidence in front of him. The house had to be stolen, the car had to be stolen, the credentials had to be fake. The calm professionalism had to be an act. Webb's assumptions were more powerful than reality. This is how systemic racism operates in everyday spaces. It's not always violent or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, insidious, built on assumptions that seem reasonable until examined. It's a neighbor who sees a black resident and assumes they're a criminal. It's an officer who sees a black professional and assumes they're lying. It's a system that validates those assumptions until someone with power and resources fights back. And when that bias is backed by the authority to detain, to demand ID, to treat someone like a suspect in their own driveway, it doesn't just harm individuals. It sends a message. You don't belong here. No matter your credentials, no matter your service to your country, no matter your rights, no matter your humanity. Marcus Webb's career is over. That's consequence. The county paid $850,000. That's accountability. But money and terminations don't undo the trauma of being detained while washing your car. They don't restore the dignity of being treated like a criminal in front of your neighbors. They don't erase the message that even a federal badge isn't enough to protect you from bias. The real question is, what changes now? Does Fairfax County finally remove officers after 5 complaints instead of 9? Do neighbors finally think before calling 911 on people who are simply existing in their own neighborhoods? Do we finally acknowledge that suspicious activity too often means black people doing ordinary things in spaces where bias says they don't belong? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Webb on patrol for 7 years despite 9 complaints, if we don't address the culture that taught that neighbor to see a black man washing a car and assume crime, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next neighbor, the next federal agent, the next victim, the next settlement. Comment if you believe this should be law. Civilians who file false police reports based on racial bias face mandatory fines and civil rights education requirements. Law enforcement agencies that fail to remove officers after documented patterns of discriminatory policing lose federal funding. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with awareness and change starts with pressure, then hit that subscribe button, because we're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for the federal agents, the homeowners, the car washers, the ordinary people who deserve to exist in their own neighborhoods without being criminalized. This isn't just about one officer, one neighbor, or one agent. It's about all of us and the world we're willing to accept.